A millionaire saw a boy identical to his deceased son crying on the street. When he approached, the boy revealed something that made the millionaire cry uncontrollably, and what happens next is even more shocking. I'd like to ask you to subscribe to our channel. Thank you. The city was blanketed by relentless rain, as if the sky itself mourned alongside Michael Johnson. Inside his luxurious car, Michael drove aimlessly, the roar of the engine barely muffling the echo of his sorrow. Since the death of his son James 2 years ago, each day had felt like an endless ordeal. Though he had built an empire and was one of the wealthiest men in the country, none of it could fill the void left by his son's absence. Every corner of his sprawling mansion was a cruel reminder of what he had lost. The walls adorned with photographs, the carefully stored toys in the corner of the living room, the rusting bicycle still sitting in the garden. Every object was a silent testament to the life that was no more. For weeks, Michael had been fleeing the confines of those walls, searching for something, anything that could ease the crushing weight on his chest. As rain pelted the windshield, his thoughts darkened. How did I let this happen? He berated himself repeatedly. He had invested all his time in work, leaving the important moments with James to be replaced by empty promises and late apologies. Suddenly, a small, hunched figure caught his attention. Michael slowed the car, furrowing his brow as he tried to make out what he was seeing. Beneath a battered tree in the park, a boy sat on the ground, completely drenched by the rain. His legs were pulled up against his chest, and his thin arms wrapped around them in a futile attempt to shield himself from the cold. Michael felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Something about the scene sent a chill through him, as if he had seen it before. He parked the car by the curb, turned off the engine, and stepped out, uncaring that the rain soaked him within seconds. With careful, deliberate steps, he approached the boy. As he drew closer, the boy lifted his head, and Michael froze in his tracks. The child's face was a perfect reflection of James at that age. The same messy brown hair, the dark, sorrowful eyes, even the way his lips trembled, all of it mirrored his son. "Hello, little one," Michael said, struggling to keep his voice steady. "What are you doing out here all alone? You're soaking wet." The boy didn't respond immediately. He simply stared at Michael with distrust, as if trying to decide whether the man with teary eyes was a threat or a savior. "Are you lost?" Michael pressed gently, kneeling before him. "You can't stay here in the rain. Come with me. I can help." The boy finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "I have nowhere to go." Michael felt a crushing weight in his chest upon hearing those words. "Where are your parents?" "I don't have any," the boy replied, his tone devoid of the warmth one would expect from a child. "What's your name?" "My name is Thomas." Michael took a deep breath, attempting to steady the storm of emotions raging within him. "Thomas, you can't stay here. Come with me. There's a warm and safe place where we can talk." The boy narrowed his eyes, seeming to weigh Michael's intentions. After a few moments, he shook his head. "You shouldn't help me. I'll only bring trouble." The boy's words echoed eerily in Michael's mind. "I don't care about trouble, Thomas. I'm not leaving you here alone. Please trust me." For a moment, Thomas seemed to consider the offer. Finally, he timidly took Michael's hand, a gesture that deeply moved him. However, just as they were about to head to the car, Thomas stopped and turned his head toward the park's shadows. "What is it?" Michael asked, following the boy's gaze. "Someone's there," Thomas whispered, gripping Michael's hand tightly. Michael frowned, straining to see through the trees. He saw no one, but couldn't ignore the boy's unease. "There's no one there, Thomas. Come on, let's get to the car." Thomas nodded hesitantly and allowed himself to be led. Michael helped him into the passenger seat and turned the heater on full blast. As he drove, he couldn't stop glancing at Thomas. Every gesture reminded him of James. The way the boy ran his hand through his wet hair, how he stared out the window with melancholy. "Where did you live before coming here?" Michael asked, trying to gather more information. "In an ugly place," Thomas replied with a shrug. "Ugly how? Was it an orphanage?" Thomas didn't answer. He simply pressed his lips together and stared at his feet. Michael decided not to push for the moment. When they arrived at a small cafe on the outskirts of the city, Michael turned off the car and looked at the boy seriously. "Thomas, I want you to know that I'm here to help you. No matter what's going on, we'll figure it out together." The boy looked at him intently, and for the first time, Michael noticed a glimmer of hope in his eyes. Without a word, Thomas stepped out of the car and followed him inside. The warmth of the cafe enveloped them immediately. Michael ordered 2 hot chocolates, and they sat by a window. While they waited, Thomas remained silent, nervously fidgeting with his fingers. "Thomas, can you tell me why you were at the park?" Michael asked. The boy looked up, hesitating before he answered. "I'm looking for my mom." Michael felt a chill at his words. "Your mom? Do you know where she is?" Thomas shook his head. "She just told me to look for a big house, my dad's house." Michael's heart raced. Before he could ask more questions, Thomas glanced toward the window, his eyes widening in fear. "It's him!" he exclaimed, his voice trembling. Michael turned quickly, scanning for what had alarmed the boy. Outside, a dark car was parked by the curb. The figure of a man inside seemed to be watching them from the shadows. The tension in the air was palpable. Michael felt a protective instinct surge within him. He didn't know who the man was or why he seemed to be observing them, but it was clear Thomas had reason to fear him. As the dark car remained stationary under the rain, Michael realized there was much more to this encounter than he initially thought. One thing, however, was certain. He couldn't abandon Thomas, no matter what it entailed. The rain continued beating against the cafe windows as the silence between Michael and Thomas grew heavier. Michael looked at the boy, a lump forming in his throat, unable to ignore the heartbreaking similarities to his late son, James. Every small movement Thomas made, from the way he brushed wet hair from his face to how he held his hot chocolate with both hands, was an echo of a past Michael thought he had buried. "Are you cold?" Michael finally asked, breaking the silence. "A little," Thomas replied, his voice so soft it almost got lost amidst the cafe's quiet murmur. Michael removed his coat and draped it over the boy's small shoulders. "This should help. If you need anything else, just let me know, okay?" Thomas nodded, but his gaze remained fixed on the window, as though he were bracing for someone or something to appear at any moment. Michael couldn't ignore the boy's guarded demeanor. He had so many questions but didn't want to scare him away. "Thomas," Michael began cautiously, "you said you're looking for your mom. Do you have any idea where she might be?" The boy stayed silent for a moment, nervously fidgeting with the edges of the coat. Finally, he looked up and answered, "She told me that if something went wrong, I should find a big house and the man who lives there." Michael felt a chill run down his spine. "What kind of house? Do you know what it looks like?" "I don't know," Thomas admitted. "She just said it would be a big house, that it was important, but I don't know where to look." Michael leaned back in his chair, trying to process what he had just heard. Part of him wanted to believe it was just a coincidence, but something deep inside told him there was more to this story. "How long has it been since you last saw your mom?" he asked gently. Thomas pressed his lips together, hesitating before answering. "Weeks, or maybe months. I don't know. She left one day and said she'd be back soon, but she never came back." The boy's confession struck a chord in Michael's heart. "And you've been alone ever since?" Thomas nodded slowly. "I stayed at the orphanage, but I couldn't stay there anymore. I don't like being alone. I don't like feeling forgotten." Michael felt the boy's words resonate deeply within him. Thomas's loneliness mirrored his own, and it unsettled him more than he cared to admit. "Listen, Thomas," Michael said, leaning forward. "I'm going to help you. I promise. But I need you to tell me more about your mom. Do you remember what she looks like? Anything that might help me find her?" The boy hesitated for a moment, but then pulled something out of his pocket, a small, crumpled photograph. Michael took it carefully. In the picture, a young woman held a baby in her arms. Her face was partially obscured by a shadow, but there was something vaguely familiar about her expression. "Is this her?" Michael asked. Thomas nodded. "Yeah, that's my mom. I always miss her." Before Michael could say anything else, Thomas suddenly stiffened. His gaze snapped back to the window, and his breathing quickened. "It's him!" he exclaimed, pointing outside. Michael turned quickly and saw the dark car parked across the street. Though the tinted windows obscured whoever was inside, there was something unsettling about the way the vehicle sat there, motionless, as if watching them. "Who is he?" Michael asked urgently. "I don't know," Thomas said, clearly frightened, "but he's been following me since I left the orphanage. I don't want him to find me." Michael felt a surge of protectiveness rise within him. He wouldn't let anything happen to this boy. "It's okay, Thomas. We won't let him take you. Stay here while I find out who he is." "No, don't go outside," Thomas pleaded, gripping Michael's arm tightly. "Please don't go." Michael froze, looking into the boy's fearful eyes. "Okay, I won't go outside, but I need to know something, Thomas. Why do you think someone is following you? Do you have any idea who it might be?" The boy shook his head, but his eyes revealed more fear than he was willing to admit. "I just know they don't want me to find my mom. She said some bad men might come looking for me, but I don't know why." Michael felt the mystery deepen. Why would anyone be interested in following a boy like Thomas? What connection could this have to his mother? "Thomas, I need you to listen carefully," Michael said, placing a firm but reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "I'm going to protect you. No one is going to hurt you while you're with me, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Thomas nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll trust you." Michael felt a momentary wave of relief at hearing those words, but he knew the real challenge was only beginning. As he glanced back at the window, the dark car's headlights flicked on, and it slowly drove away, as if aware it had been spotted. Michael leaned toward Thomas and said firmly, "We're leaving. It's not safe to stay here any longer. I'll take you to my house, and we can talk there." The boy hesitated, but eventually nodded. Michael quickly paid the bill, and the two stepped out into the rain. Thomas clung to Michael's coat as they walked to the car, as if afraid the dark car would return at any moment. As they drove back to Michael's mansion, the silence between them was heavy with tension. Michael knew this encounter wasn't a coincidence. There was something about Thomas, something beyond his resemblance to James, that felt destined to change his life forever. Before we continue with the story, I'd like to ask you to subscribe to our channel. Thank you. The rain continued pounding against the car windows as Michael drove toward his mansion, the weight of countless questions pressing down on him like an unrelenting burden. Thomas, seated in the passenger seat, gazed out the window with a melancholic expression, his small frame wrapped in the oversized coat Michael had given him. The silence in the car was almost unbearable, but Michael didn't want to force the boy to talk. He knew the answers would come in time. When they finally arrived at the mansion, Michael turned off the engine and looked at Thomas. "We're here. You can get out whenever you're ready." The boy stared at the imposing facade of the house with a mixture of awe and apprehension. "It's so big," he said softly, his voice barely audible. Michael nodded as he stepped out of the car and opened Thomas's door. "It is big, but it's also very empty. Maybe, with someone else here, it will feel a little less lonely." Thomas slowly stepped out, clutching his small backpack tightly against his chest. Michael noticed how hesitant the boy seemed, as though the sheer size of the mansion intimidated him. "You don't have to worry," Michael said, kneeling to meet his eyes. "You'll be safe here, I promise." With a deep breath, Thomas nodded and crossed the threshold. The mansion, illuminated by the warm glow of its lights, seemed like an entirely different place compared to the cold, rainy night outside. Michael shut the door behind them and allowed the boy to explore at his own pace. Thomas moved cautiously, his eyes scanning the high ceilings, antique paintings on the walls, and the carefully arranged furniture. He stopped in front of a large portrait hanging in the main hall. The painting depicted Michael, his wife, and a young boy. "Is that him?" Thomas asked, pointing at the child in the portrait. Michael felt the air leave his lungs. "Yes, that was my son, James." "He looks like me," Thomas said, his voice filled with curiosity but also tinged with sadness. "Yes, you look a lot like him," Michael replied, his voice breaking slightly. The silence that followed was interrupted by the loud rumble of Thomas's stomach. Michael chuckled softly, trying to lighten the mood. "Sounds like you're hungry. Let's head to the kitchen. I'll whip something up for you." Thomas followed him to the kitchen, where Michael opened the fridge and pulled out some basic ingredients. "Do you like grilled cheese sandwiches?" he asked, turning on the stove. "Yes, I love them," Thomas replied, climbing into a chair and setting his backpack on the table. As Michael prepared the sandwich, he decided to carefully ask a few questions. "Thomas, can you tell me more about your mom? You said she left you at the orphanage. Do you remember why she did that?" The boy shrugged, staring at his backpack as if trying to avoid the question. "She said it was for my own good. She said she was trying to protect me from something, but I don't know what." Michael frowned as he placed the warm sandwich on a plate and brought it to the table. "Protect you from what, Thomas? Did she mention anyone or anything specific?" "She just said there were bad men," Thomas murmured before taking a bite of the sandwich. Michael sat across from him, watching as he ate. "Did she tell you anything else? Did she mention a man or a specific place where you should go?" Thomas set the sandwich down and opened his backpack. Carefully, he pulled out a crumpled envelope and placed it on the table. "She gave me this before she left. She told me not to open it until I found the big house." Michael stared at the envelope, disbelief written across his face. "Can I see it?" he asked. Thomas hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. Michael picked up the envelope with trembling hands and opened it. Inside was a letter written in hurried handwriting. "If you're reading this, it means you found my son. Please take care of him. There are things I can't explain right now, but I trust you'll know what to do. He deserves a better life, far away from everything I couldn't protect him from." Michael's heart raced as he read the note. It didn't explain much, but it was clear that Thomas's mother had left him at the orphanage in the hope that someone would find and protect him. "Thomas, this letter. Do you know who might have written it?" "It's from my mom," Thomas answered with certainty. "She said someone good would understand what it meant." Before Michael could respond, Thomas pulled another object from his backpack, a small drawing made with crayons. The picture depicted a large house, a man with dark hair, and a small boy holding hands. Michael felt a lump rise in his throat as he recognized the house as his mansion. "Did you draw this?" Michael asked, his voice trembling. "Yes," Thomas said, gazing at the drawing fondly. "My mom told me to find this house. She said I'd be safe here." Michael didn't know what to think. The connection between Thomas and his own life was too strange to be a coincidence. Determined to uncover the truth, he leaned toward the boy and said, "Thomas, I want to help you find your mom, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Thomas looked him in the eye, and after a long moment of silence, he nodded. "I trust you." Michael smiled, feeling a spark of hope for the first time in years. "Good. Then tomorrow, we'll start looking for answers. I promise we'll find your mom." As Thomas yawned and Michael led him to a room where he could rest, he couldn't stop thinking about how drastically his life had changed in just a few hours. Something told him that this boy didn't just need his help. He might also be the key to healing Michael's own broken heart. The morning light streamed softly through the windows of the mansion. Michael sat in the living room, staring at the drawing Thomas had shown him the night before. The precision with which the boy had depicted the house was unsettling. How could he have drawn it in such detail if he had never been there? The question haunted him as he waited for Thomas to wake up. Eventually, the boy appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes and clutching his backpack. "Can I stay here a little longer?" he asked timidly, as though afraid of the answer. "Of course you can," Michael replied with a warm smile. "But today, we're going somewhere that might give us some answers. I want to help you understand what happened to your mom." Thomas looked at him with a mix of hope and nervousness. "Are we going back to the orphanage?" "Yes, but not to leave you there," Michael clarified quickly. "I want to speak with the director and learn more about what happened before you ended up there." Minutes later, they were in the car, driving toward the orphanage. Michael tried to keep the conversation light, but he could sense Thomas's tension. "Are you feeling okay, Thomas? You can tell me if something is bothering you." The boy sighed, gazing out the window. "I just hope Miss Beatrice doesn't get mad at me for leaving. She always says I'm a problem for everyone." Michael felt a pang of anger at hearing this. "No one has the right to say that to you. You're not a problem, Thomas. You're an incredible kid, and I'm here to help you." When they arrived at the orphanage, the atmosphere was somber. The building had a worn-down facade, with cracked walls and windows that let in only a sliver of light. Michael took Thomas's hand and led him to the front entrance. They were greeted by Beatrice, the orphanage's director, who attempted to hide her discomfort behind a forced smile. "Mr. Michael, I wasn't expecting to see you so soon. And I see Thomas has returned. I suppose he now understands he can't just leave whenever he wants," Beatrice said in a condescending tone. Michael noted her attitude, but kept his composure. "I'm here because I want to learn more about Thomas and his mother. He showed me something that makes me think there's more to this story than what I've been told. Can we speak in private?" Beatrice hesitated before nodding. "Of course. Come to my office. Thomas can wait here." "I'd prefer he stays with me," Michael said firmly, holding the boy's hand. Beatrice seemed surprised but didn't argue. She led them to a small office cluttered with disorganized papers and a faint smell of dampness. Michael sat across from the desk, Thomas at his side, and fixed his gaze on the director. "I want to know everything you can tell me about Thomas's mother," Michael began decisively. "He told me she left him here to protect him, but that doesn't explain why she never came back. He also showed me a drawing of my house. How did his mother know that was my house?" Beatrice stiffened, avoiding eye contact. "Mr. Michael, I don't know exactly what his mother told him, but Anna was a complicated woman. She arrived here desperate, asking for help, and left Thomas with a note saying it was for his safety. She never explained further, and she never returned." Michael frowned. "You're saying his mother's name was Anna?" Beatrice nodded slowly. "Yes, that was her name. Why do you ask?" Michael felt his heart race. The name matched that of the woman who had worked for him and his wife before the tragedy that had changed their lives. Did Anna ever mention working for a family or anything about her past? Beatrice hesitated, but finally answered. She only said she was running from something, or someone. She never gave details, but she always seemed afraid. "Mr. Michael, is there something I should know?" Before Michael could respond, Thomas spoke for the first time since entering the office. "Where is my mom now? Why didn't she come back for me?" Beatrice lowered her gaze, unable to meet the intensity in the boy's eyes. "I don't know, Thomas. We tried to contact her, but she never responded." Michael leaned toward Thomas and took his hand. "We'll find her, Thomas. I promise I won't stop until we know where she is." As they left the office, Michael decided to take a look around the rest of the orphanage. While walking through the hallways, he noticed a shelf filled with children's drawings. Among them, one caught his eye immediately. It was similar to the drawing Thomas had shown him, but this one included a tall man standing beside the house. The drawing was signed with Thomas's name. "Did you draw this?" Michael asked, pointing to the picture. Thomas nodded but said nothing. Michael took the drawing and tucked it into his pocket. Something inside him told him this small detail was significant. That evening, as they drove back to the mansion, Michael couldn't stop thinking about Anna and what Beatrice had said about her. If she was indeed the same Anna who had worked for him, why had she never mentioned having a son? And why would she have fled so abruptly? When they arrived home, Michael sat in his study and pulled out Thomas's drawing along with the letter he had found in the boy's backpack. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to come together, but there were still too many unanswered questions. In the quiet of the night, Michael looked in on Thomas, who was peacefully asleep in one of the guest rooms. "I won't abandon you," Michael whispered to himself. "No matter what it takes, I'll find your mom and uncover the truth." Michael's mansion was steeped in a heavy silence as night fell. After the visit to the orphanage, Beatrice's words echoed relentlessly in his mind. The name Anna had not only reopened old wounds, but also instilled a sense of urgency. It was a puzzle, one that intertwined with his past and the inexplicable bond he felt with Thomas. Sitting on the living room couch, Michael stared at the drawing he had tucked into his pocket. The figure of the man standing beside the house, drawn with clumsy but clear lines, unsettled him. Something about it seemed to shout that there was more to uncover. Determined to find answers, he decided to search the one place where the secrets of his life had accumulated over the years, the attic. Michael climbed the creaky stairs, holding a flashlight in one hand. When he opened the attic door, he was met with a rush of dust and the smell of aged wood. Stacks of boxes filled the corners, untouched since his son's death. Carefully, he opened one of the boxes labeled with his late wife's name. Inside, he found photo albums, letters, and small trinkets that carried memories of happier times. As he flipped through the pages of an album, he paused at a picture of his son at the same age as Thomas. The resemblance was startling, almost disturbing. "How is this even possible?" he murmured, staring at the eyes of the boy in the photo, so identical to Thomas's. As he continued searching, he came across a carefully folded letter. He instantly recognized his wife's handwriting. Opening it, he read the words, written in slightly faded ink. "Michael, there are things I never told you because I was afraid. Anna, well, I don't know if I did the right thing by trusting her so much. But her situation was complicated, and all I can ask is that if you ever discover something about her life, don't judge her without knowing the truth. She had a son. I never knew much more, but I always felt there was something she didn't tell us before she left. Please, if they ever cross your path, take care of them." Michael's heart began to race. His wife had known something about Anna, though not enough to understand the full extent of the connection. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the memories wash over him. Anna had worked for them for years, a constant presence in their home, yet always reserved, always mysterious. When she disappeared, he had assumed she'd simply found another job. He never imagined her departure might be tied to such a profound secret. Suddenly, a noise from outside snapped him out of his thoughts. He quickly got up and descended the stairs, still holding the flashlight. Peering through the living room windows, he saw nothing unusual, but a gnawing sense of unease settled in his chest. Returning to the living room, he sat back down, holding both the letter and Thomas's drawing. There were too many coincidences, too many loose ends. "I can't let this go," he said quietly, as if needing to hear himself confirm his resolve. That night, before going to bed, Michael reviewed the mansion's security cameras. He noticed something odd. A dark car had been parked briefly outside his home before slowly driving away. Paranoia began to creep in. Who was watching him? Could it be connected to Anna? The next morning, Michael prepared breakfast for Thomas, who sat at the table with a shy smile. "Did you sleep well, Thomas?" Michael asked, pouring juice into a glass. "Yes, but I dreamed about my mom again," the boy replied. "We were in a big house, but she kept saying she couldn't stay with me there." Michael paused for a moment, sensing that the boy's words held more meaning than they seemed. "Do you remember anything else from that dream, Thomas? Sometimes dreams can help us remember important things." Thomas shook his head, playing with his spoon in his plate. "I just remember feeling sad. But she said that one day everything would be okay." After breakfast, Michael decided to take Thomas to a nearby park to distract him. However, he couldn't stop thinking about the letter and the connections forming in his mind. While Thomas played on the swings, Michael checked his phone messages. One, in particular, caught his attention. It was from Carlos, the family's former gardener. "Mr. Michael, I think we need to talk. It's about Anna. There are things I didn't tell you before, but now I think you need to know." The message was brief, but enough to ignite a spark of hope. Michael immediately replied, arranging to meet Carlos that same afternoon. When they returned to the mansion, Michael tried to remain calm around Thomas, though the anticipation was eating away at him. Finally, the time for the meeting came, and Carlos arrived at the door, holding an envelope in his hand. "Mr. Michael," Carlos said in a trembling voice, "this is something I found after Anna left. I didn't know if I should give it to you, but now I think you need to know the truth." Michael took the envelope and opened it slowly. Inside was another letter from Anna, along with a small photograph of a baby. The letter was short but impactful. "Michael, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't return to explain everything. But I want you to know that I did the best I could for my son. I never wanted to lie to you, but there were things I couldn't say. Thomas is a special boy, and he deserves more than I could give him. I trust you'll know what to do if you ever find him. Forgive me." The photograph showed a baby who was unmistakably Thomas. Michael felt a lump in his chest as tears welled in his eyes. The truth was beginning to reveal itself, but there were still so many questions left unanswered. That night, as Thomas slept, Michael sat at his desk, holding the photograph and the letter. "I promise you, Thomas," he whispered, "I'll do everything I can to understand what happened. I won't leave you alone." The afternoon in Michael's mansion was quieter than usual. After reading Anna's letter and seeing Thomas's photograph, pieces of a puzzle were starting to come together. but there were still too many gaps. Michael stood by the window, watching Thomas play with a small wooden airplane in the garden. His carefree smile was a painful contrast to the emotional storm brewing within Michael. Carlos, the former gardener, sat nervously in the living room. Michael knew the information he was about to hear could change everything. He poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from him. "I need the truth, Carlos," Michael said firmly, though his voice hinted at uncertainty. "Why did Anna leave this letter with you? What was really happening back then?" Carlos took a sip of coffee, letting the silence linger for a few moments. Finally, he sighed. "Mr. Michael, I never wanted to get involved in this, but Anna asked me to keep it safe in case something went wrong. She was scared, always looking over her shoulder as if someone was watching her." Michael frowned. Who was watching her? Did she have enemies? "I trusted Anna completely. I never imagined she might be in danger." Carlos shook his head, his hands trembling slightly. "I don't know all the details. The only thing I know is that Anna often talked about someone chasing her, someone who wanted something she had. She never said it outright, but mentioned she couldn't stay in one place for long." Michael nodded, processing every word. "Did she ever mention Thomas? Did you know she had a son?" Carlos looked down. "Not at first, but one day, I overheard her talking to herself, crying. She said something like, 'No matter what happens, I have to protect him.' Shortly after that, she disappeared from here." The weight of Carlos's words hit Michael like a ton of bricks. The image of Anna, frightened and on the run, filled him with guilt. She had been part of his life for years, and yet he had never noticed the signs of her suffering. "Do you know where she might have gone? Did she mention any place?" Michael asked, leaning forward. Carlos rubbed his hands nervously. "She used to talk about a small town, something about a safe place, but she also said she wasn't sure how long she could hide." Michael made a mental note of those words. There was an urgency in his chest, a need to understand what had happened to Anna and how Thomas fit into all of this. He stood up, giving Carlos a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "Thank you, Carlos. This means more than you know." As Carlos left, Michael climbed the stairs to revisit his son's belongings. He felt that something in his own home might hold the answer he was looking for. In a box filled with old documents, he found a list of former employees' contacts, and one name stood out: Beatriz, the orphanage director. "Of course," he murmured to himself. "She must know more." That afternoon, Michael and Thomas returned to the orphanage. The place seemed even more somber than it had during their last visit. Beatriz greeted them with her usual strained smile, but Michael was in no mood for evasions. "I need to speak with you privately, Beatriz," he said, motioning toward her office. Beatriz hesitated, but eventually relented. Once the door was closed, Michael wasted no time. "I know you know more than you've told me. What really happened with Anna, and why did she leave Thomas here?" Beatriz looked nervous. "Mr. Michael, I already told you everything I could. Anna was in a complicated situation, but she never explained all the details." Michael crossed his arms, his gaze fixed on hers. "Don't lie to me, Beatriz. I found letters from Anna mentioning she was in danger. You knew what was going on but decided to stay quiet. I need answers right now." Finally, Beatriz relented, slumping into her chair. "Anna showed up here one night, completely desperate. She said she had no other choice and needed us to take care of her son. She begged me to keep him safe, to make sure no one ever found him." Michael felt a chill run down his spine. Who was looking for Anna? Who was threatening her? Beatriz shook her head, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I don't know for sure, but Anna mentioned something about a man who was after something important, something tied to her past." Michael clenched his fists. The puzzle pieces were beginning to fit, but key details were still missing. He decided not to press Beatriz further at that moment, but made a silent vow. He wouldn't rest until he uncovered the whole truth. On the drive back home, Thomas watched him from the back seat. "Are you sad, Mr. Michael?" he asked softly. Michael forced a smile. "Thomas, I'm just thinking about how we can find your mom. I'm sure she'd want to see you happy." The boy nodded, but his expression reflected a pain that Michael recognized all too well, the feeling of being abandoned. That night, while Thomas slept, Michael sat at his desk with the list of contacts in front of him. His finger stopped at the name Sarah, another former employee who had worked in the mansion during the same period as Anna. "Sarah, I hope you have answers," he murmured before dialing the number on his phone. The call connected after a few rings, and a female voice answered. "Who's this?" "Sarah, it's Michael," he said, his voice a mix of hope and anxiety. "I need to talk to you. It's about Anna and her son." There was a long silence before Sarah replied. "Michael, this is something that should have been resolved years ago. Why are you looking for answers now?" "Because I found the boy, Sarah. I found Thomas, and I can't ignore what's happening. I need to know the truth." Sarah sighed. "Come see me tomorrow. But I warn you, Michael, this story is more complicated than you think." When the call ended, Michael leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He knew that meeting Sarah would be pivotal, but he also felt that every answer he uncovered brought him closer to an unknown danger. The following morning arrived under a gray sky, as though the city itself bore the weight of the secrets Michael was about to uncover. He drove silently to the modest neighborhood where Sarah, the former employee of his family, now lived. Thomas sat beside him, gazing out the window as the urban scenery blurred past. Though the boy remained quiet, Michael could sense his unease. "Do you know who this lady is?" Thomas asked, breaking the silence. Michael glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "She used to work at my house a long time ago. I think she might help us understand why your mom had to leave." Thomas frowned. "Do you think she knows where my mom is?" Michael sighed, the weight of uncertainty pressing against his chest. "I hope so, Thomas. But no matter what happens, I promise we won't give up." When they arrived, Sarah greeted them at the door with a look brimming with emotions. It was clear she was nervous, but there was also a glimmer of relief in her eyes. "Come in, Michael. You too, little one. We can't talk about this out in the open," Sarah said as she ushered them inside. The interior of the house was cozy yet humble. Sarah served them tea while fumbling to find the right words to begin. Finally, she sat down across from Michael, her hands trembling slightly. "I knew this day would come, Michael," she began, "but I never thought you'd bring the boy with you." She looked at Thomas, her voice wavering. "He looks so much like—" "Don't say it," Michael interrupted, closing his eyes to suppress the tears. "Just tell me what you know. Why did Anna have to run? What made her leave her son behind?" Sarah took a sip of tea before speaking. Anna was a strong woman, but she was trapped in something far bigger than she could handle. When she came to work at your house, it was because she needed protection. She never said from whom exactly, but she mentioned being watched. She said someone powerful wanted to harm her, and she wasn't sure how long she could stay safe. Michael nodded slowly, absorbing her words. "And the boy? Why didn't she tell me she had a son? Why didn't she trust me?" Sarah's gaze softened with a mix of sadness and compassion. "She did trust you, Michael, but she also knew you were dealing with the loss of your own son. She didn't want to burden you further. And then, well, things got more complicated." "What things?" Michael pressed, leaning forward. Sarah looked down, avoiding his gaze. "Anna discovered something about your family, something she didn't fully explain to me, but it terrified her even more. She mentioned finding documents among your father's belongings, something about a property and a name, Thomas. That's why she named her son that." The air in the room seemed to freeze. Michael was left speechless, trying to process what he had just heard. "Are you saying my father?" "I don't know for sure," Sarah interrupted quickly, "but I think you need to search the things left in the mansion. Maybe you'll find answers there." Thomas, who had been fiddling with a cup on the table, looked up. "Was my mom scared because of something she found in your house?" Michael struggled to find the right response. He could only nod, his mind racing with questions. Before they left, Sarah handed Michael a sealed envelope. "Anna asked me to give this to you if you ever came looking for answers. I never opened it because I knew it was personal. I hope you find what you're looking for." Michael accepted the envelope carefully, feeling the symbolic weight of Sarah's words. With a sincere thank you, he left the house with Thomas. Back at the mansion, Michael sat in his study, holding the envelope in his hands. Thomas watched him from the sofa, his gaze unwavering. "Are you going to read it now?" the boy asked. Michael nodded slowly. "Yes, but I'm not sure what I'll find." He opened the envelope carefully and pulled out a handwritten letter. Anna's handwriting was rushed, as though written under duress. "Dear Michael, if you're reading this, it means I had no other choice. I always wanted to tell you the truth, but I was too afraid of what might happen. My son, Thomas, is the most important thing in the world to me, and I'll do whatever it takes to protect him. I found something in the mansion, something that could change everything, but also something that could put my son in danger. Please, Michael, if you ever find Thomas, take care of him as you would your own child. I trust you more than anyone else. Forgive me for not being honest with you, but my love for my son was always stronger than my fear. Anna." Tears rolled down Michael's cheeks as he read the letter. Thomas slowly approached him and placed a small hand on his arm. "Did she ask you to take care of me?" Michael looked at him, his eyes filled with emotion. "Yes, Thomas, and I'll do everything I can to keep that promise." But the words in the letter lingered in his mind. Something in the mansion, something Anna had found. Michael knew he had to search the old belongings of his family again. That same night, he began sorting through boxes and documents in the mansion's attic. In a dusty box, he found a file labeled with his father's name. Inside were contracts and property deeds, but what caught his attention was a letter written by his father. "Thomas." The letter began in large letters. Michael felt a chill run down his spine as he read further. The letter referenced a financial arrangement with a woman named Anna, but didn't provide clear details. Just as he thought he was close to an important clue, his phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. "Stop searching. This is not your business." Michael stared at the message, his heart pounding. He knew he was getting closer to the truth, but danger was now looming closer than ever. The sun was just beginning to rise when Michael woke up, determined to put an end to all the lingering doubts. Anna's letter and the documents he had uncovered in the attic had left him in a state of constant tension. He now understood that his father had a direct connection to Anna, but there were still too many unanswered questions. He glanced at Thomas, who was sleeping on the sofa in the study, his small frame wrapped in a blanket. The boy looked peaceful, oblivious to the emotional storm raging inside Michael. While preparing coffee, the doorbell rang. Sarah had insisted on staying nearby to help with whatever was necessary, but Michael still felt she wasn't telling him everything she knew. "Good morning, Sarah. Thanks for coming so early," he said as he let her in. Sarah gave him a serious look. "I couldn't stop thinking about what we found yesterday. If you really believe Thomas is connected to your father, we need to tread carefully. There are things about your family that should never come to light." Michael frowned. "I don't understand why everyone insists on keeping things from me. If there's something that can help me protect Thomas, I want to know. What are you not telling me, Sarah?" Sarah sighed and avoided his gaze. "It's not my place to tell you everything, Michael, but I can tell you this. Anna always said she trusted you more than anyone else. If she left clues, it's because she knew you would find a way to protect him." Thomas woke up at that moment, interrupting the conversation. "Are you talking about my mom again?" he asked groggily. Michael crouched down to his level. "We're trying to figure out where she is and why she had to leave you. But I want you to know you're not alone in this. Sarah and I are here to help you." The boy nodded, but his expression remained guarded. Michael understood. Thomas had been through so much in such a short time. Hours later, Michael decided to take Thomas to a nearby park to distract him for a while. As the boy played with other children, Michael received a call from an unknown number. He hesitated before answering, but eventually picked up. "Who is this?" he asked firmly. The voice on the other end was cold and deep. "I warned you to stop searching. You're crossing a dangerous line, Michael. This isn't just about you." Michael felt a chill run down his spine. "Who are you, and what do you want? Why are you so interested in my connection to Anna and Thomas?" The voice paused before responding. "Some truths are better left buried. If you continue, you could endanger everyone around you." The call ended abruptly, leaving Michael with his heart racing. He looked toward the park and saw Thomas running happily, blissfully unaware of the danger that seemed to surround them. That evening, Sarah insisted on staying with Thomas while Michael returned to the mansion to investigate further. He knew something important was hidden there, and he couldn't afford to ignore it. As he searched a room that had gone unnoticed for years, he found an old cabinet locked with a key. Using one of the keys he had found in the attic, He managed to open it. Inside was a safe containing documents bearing his father's and Anna's names. When he opened it, he discovered a contract stating that Anna had worked for his father under very particular conditions. In addition to being a housekeeper, she had also acted as a witness to some questionable business dealings. What stood out the most to Michael was a letter signed by Anna, in which she mentioned having to hide something important to protect her son. The letter ended with a warning. "Michael, if you ever find this, know that I never meant to betray you. But I had to choose between my life and Thomas's. I hope you can forgive me and care for him as if he were your own son." Michael closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Things were becoming clearer now. Anna had been in danger because of something she knew, and his father had likely been involved. Back at home, Michael sat with Sarah in the living room while Thomas slept. He told her everything he had found. Sarah listened intently, but when he mentioned the connection between Anna and his father, her face grew tense. "Anna never spoke to me about dealings with your father, but she always said he wasn't what he seemed to be. She trusted you because she saw something different in you, Michael. Something you didn't inherit from him," Sarah said with heartfelt sincerity. Michael nodded, feeling a mix of gratitude and sorrow. "I want Thomas to have a better future. I can't erase the past, but I can make sure he's safe and has a family who loves him." Sarah gave him a soft smile. "Then start by showing him he doesn't have to be alone anymore. You're the closest thing to a father he's ever had, Michael. Don't let him down." The next day, Michael made a definitive decision. He took Thomas to meet with a lawyer to begin the adoption process. Though the road ahead would be long and complicated, he was determined to make it happen. When he explained to Thomas what it meant, the boy looked at him with a mix of surprise and joy. "You want me to be your son?" Thomas asked incredulously. Michael placed a hand on his shoulder. "I don't want you to be my son, Thomas. You already are in my heart. I just want to make it official." The boy hugged him tightly, and for the first time since finding him, Michael felt like he was finally on the right path. Michael's mansion was unrecognizable. The once vast and empty hallways now echoed with laughter, tiny footsteps, and the vibrant sounds of a life that seemed to have returned from the shadows. Thomas was running across the garden, a ball in his hands, his crystal-clear laughter filling the air. Michael watched from the terrace, a mix of admiration and gratitude washing over him. Thomas was no longer the frightened child he had found in the rain, and Michael himself was no longer the man lost in his own emptiness. That serendipitous encounter had transformed them both forever. Earlier that morning, Michael had finalized Thomas's adoption at the courthouse. The judge, with a warm smile, had handed him the official papers, saying, "This is the start of something beautiful. Not everyone gets a second chance, but you and this boy have shown that they are real." Michael replayed the moment in his mind, remembering how Thomas, sitting beside him, had looked up and quietly asked, "So, I'm your son now?" "You've always been my son, Thomas," Michael had responded without hesitation. Now, standing on the terrace, Michael allowed himself a moment of calm reflection. Thomas had not only brought purpose back into his life, but had also given him a reason to love again. The bond they now shared was unbreakable, built on trust and the promise that neither of them would ever be alone again. Meanwhile, Sarah was in the kitchen, preparing a special dinner. She had decorated the dining room with garlands, balloons, and a handmade banner that read, "Welcome home, Thomas." It was her way of showing the boy that, from this day forward, he would always have a place where he was loved and protected. Sarah paused for a moment, holding a plate as she thought about how her own life had changed. Thomas had reminded her of the importance of hope, and Michael had shown her that even amid loss and pain, love could bloom again. She felt a special connection to both of them, and while she wasn't entirely sure of her place in this new dynamic, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. Dinner was a perfect reflection of what they had built together. The table was filled with food, laughter, and stories. Thomas excitedly recounted his day at the park while Michael and Sarah listened intently. "Dad, did you know I kicked the ball so hard it almost fell into the lake?" Thomas said, gesturing animatedly. "Really? I hope you weren't too close to the water," Michael replied, a mix of amusement and concern in his voice. "Don't worry, Sarah helped me catch it before it fell," Thomas explained, giving Sarah a knowing look. Then it sounds like we make a great team, Michael said with a smile. After dinner, Michael led Thomas into the living room, where he had prepared a surprise. In the center of the room stood a small Christmas tree, adorned with lights and shiny ornaments. Even though the holiday was still weeks away, Michael wanted Thomas to feel like he had already found his home. "Is this for me?" Thomas asked, his eyes wide with wonder. "It's for us," Michael corrected. "This tree symbolizes the beginning of our new life together. Each light represents a moment we'll share as a family." Thomas hugged Michael tightly, whispering words that melted his heart. "Thank you for not leaving me alone, Dad." Later that night, after Thomas had gone to bed, Michael and Sarah sat in the living room, enjoying the warmth of the fireplace. Michael, who rarely opened up about his past, began to share his thoughts with Sarah. "Before I found Thomas, I thought my life had no meaning," he confessed, staring into the flames. "Losing my son was like losing a part of myself. But Thomas, he didn't just bring me joy. He gave me the chance to be better." Sarah looked at him with tenderness. "You've done more for him than you realize, Michael. And I know he sees you as a hero, even if you don't see it yourself." Michael turned to her, his expression serious yet filled with gratitude. "You've been part of this too, Sarah. I don't know what I would have done without your support. Thomas needs a family, and I feel like you're part of it." Surprised but touched, Sarah smiled and replied, "I just want what's best for him, and for you too." The next day, Michael decided to take things a step further. He contacted a local organization that supported vulnerable children and offered his mansion as a temporary refuge for kids who needed a home. Inspired by Thomas's story, he wanted to create a space where more children could feel the warmth of a family, even if just for a while. "I want this house to be filled with laughter, play, and hope," he explained to the organization's representatives. "This isn't about filling the void in my life. It's about giving these kids the chance they all deserve." That evening, Michael, Sarah, and Thomas sat together in the garden, gazing at the stars. Thomas, lying between them, pointed to a particularly bright star. "That will be our star," he said dreamily. "I'll always look at it and remember that we're a family." Michael hugged him, tears welling in his eyes. "That's exactly what we are, Thomas, a family." Sarah, gently placing a hand on Michael's shoulder, added, "And no matter what happens, we'll always be together." The starry sky seemed to reflect the beginning of something new, a life filled with love, hope, and purpose. Final lesson of the story: life can be filled with pain and loss, but there is always room for redemption and love. Michael, who had lost his son and his purpose, found in Thomas not only a reason to move forward, but also a new chance to heal and love. True wealth is not measured in material possessions, but in the bonds we create with those around us. Through his connection with Thomas and Sarah, Michael discovered that even in the darkest moments, there is always a light waiting to guide us toward a better future. Thank you for listening to this incredible story until the end. If you enjoyed it, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. We also suggest watching the video that appears on the screen so you can discover other amazing stories, because I guarantee you'll be surprised.